Okay, so this gets us to the actual rules. And as we go through this, if you guys have any questions, just holler at me and we'll back up. Make sure you guys understand what's being proposed at this point. We broke parrotfish up into two functional groups, the large ones and the small ones. So these are the two large species. Amongst these two species, there's a clear distinction between the males and the females. In fact, there's a Hawaiian name for the males and the females. So those names are up there as well. So they're just kind of viewed as distinct in that respect. So what we're proposing is that, to back up, right now the current rules are 12-inch minimum size for all uhu that are regulated. Most of the small ones I'll show you next don't even make it to 12 inches in size. And if they do, they just get a little bit bigger maybe. So that really put all of the legal harvests to date on these two species. So by breaking it up now, we're making these species, their minimum size, more related to when they actually start to reproduce. And two, I'll show you, we reduced the minimum size for the other ones. So a lot of the harvest may be more spread out amongst all of the species. 14-inch minimum size, there will be a 2 uhu bag limit total, small or large uhu. And then there would be a no-take of blue male from these two species only. So the two big ones, the uli uli and the ele ele. The male blue phase would be protected from take. These are the small ones. Okay. They all kind of look similar, bright blue, greens, different shapes and colored shades maybe, but then the females are all red. Here we've dropped the minimum size to 10 inches, which is more in line with what size they reproduce. And still would be included in the 2 uhu bag limit. There would be no take of male provision for these smaller ones. And there may be some concern that there would be confusion. We feel that if people don't know the species, they'll just they need to leave the males alone altogether. And the opposite of that is these are all fairly small. Whereas the blue males for the other two species tend to be, 1.5 feet or bigger, quite distinct from these ones. Science driving this for the uhus are important. It's clearly become more and more clear to us that they play an important ecosystem role. The way they graze on limu around the edge of the reef is important for stimulating the growth of coral and algae, and therefore helping the reefs stick together and allowing new coral recruits. Reefs with healthy parrotfish biomass are critical to maintain healthy reef ecosystem. Commercial harvest has been more efficient with different gears and methods, so it's increased recently, and there's more and more decreased stocks in the shallow near-shore areas. Yes, you can still find large uhu out there. Yes, you can still find a fair amount of them if you know where to go. But you're no longer seeing them on those shallow reefs where they play an important role in the ecosystem. This graph on the left, this is all fairly recently pulled together by a grad student at HPU. Basically, the big bump in uhu harvest occurred, if you guys can't read, it was in 1978 to 1982 is that block period. And that's when spearfishing became legal to sell again. So previous to that, there was a Department of Health restriction against it, I believe. And when they opened that, the department didn't object, and basically spearfish could start to enter the market. In the late 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, there was a spike in the data from Maui land use. So there was a more effort put into Maui. And then you see that 2008, 2012 number has doubled again. There's 3 top fishers, primarily on Oahu, primarily using some kind of a surround netting approach, or some kind of a lay net tie method, where they're, from what I understand, from what I hear, they're kind of exploiting a crepuscular moving from deep water offshore areas on the north side of the island, moving into resting areas in the evenings, sleeping areas, and they're using nets and so forth to catch them. You know, the other thing to bear in mind is that a lot of, again, we suspect a lot of the fish are not being reported. And the neighbor islands, and even on Oahu, I guess there's a lot of kind of underground markets where they can sell cash quickly, and if they're not selling it to a dealer, they're not likely to report it. Maybe not because it's concerned that we see the numbers, but maybe taxes or other things. These guys, these highliners, these three main guys are catching a lot. They're almost guaranteed selling them all to dealers and stuff, and so rather than trying to move them elsewhere. So it could just be that the fishing types and who they are, there's a lot more reporting of what they're catching. And so with parrotfish, as you might imagine, the majority of the harvest statewide is still a spear. But as I mentioned on Oahu, there's other techniques they're using as well. Parrotfish biomass in areas that are fairly healthy marine reserves around the island here tends to be up somewhere around 10 grams per meter square. It depends on the habitat and so forth, but generally in fairly good marine reserve areas where fishing is not allowed, we see somewhere between 10 and 12. Big Island has 12 or 14 grams per meter square. As it gets down lower, it's only these areas where the parrotfish biomass is like 2 or less that we really see problems with seaweed. Now this is just a correlation graph. It's not like it's because the parrotfish numbers are low that the seaweed's a problem. But from the research that's done on the ecosystem and the role they play, parrotfish are believed to be one of the key players. Granted, some of these areas, you know, Kaitili, where we have the rule management in effect now, Hanama Bay is actually pretty low, which is surprising. This is work done all over the state comparing marine life conservation districts with suitable controls around that, stuff done by Friedlander. But here you just can see that there's a shift in the average size of the parrotfish. The top one being the reserves. You have that nice bell-shaped curve. Average minimum or average size is somewhere between 30 and 35 centimeters, or a little over a foot. In the open areas, it's kind of skewed down. Average size is more around 25 centimeters. Total density is 2.5 or nearly 2.5 times greater in reserves, and terminal males are 3.8 times greater in areas where fishing is not allowed. So again, just data that kind of driving the decision that we're proposing. All right, so goatfish, we kind of did the same thing here, tried to make it simple and functionally pull apart small goatfish versus large goatfish. Currently, very few goatfish species are regulated, and we wanted to, you know, they're all sought after. So we wanted to be inclusive and put everything in there, and base the minimum size of 8 inches is on the size that most of these smaller species are becoming reproductive to be mature. And then Munu, even though it's classified as a small goatfish based on its life history and its reproduction, does get a little bigger than the others and is kind of mixed in with the kumu in terms of the commercial harvest anyway in the sale. So it can get sought after and targeted. So we proposed a 2 fish bag limit for that one. Owama would stay the same, except for there's not currently an actual Owama definition. You know, currently the rules just say 7-inch no sale, 7 inch or under 7 inches. Now, because we have a minimum size of 8 inches for the goatfish, we actually are creating the definition of Owama as being 5 inches or less, and then allowing 50 fish bag limit, which currently is the amount. But a lot of public pointed out that they didn't want people harvesting them any other way other than a pole in line. So there's some loopholes where people can go out with small mesh hand nets at night and scoop them up and stuff, and the public pretty adamantly was against that. So we made it pole in line only. The large goatfish, kumu, vekinono, and the moano kea. 12-inch minimum size is more in line with the size they first start to reproduce. And then the big concern was the kumu. We initially actually proposed a 5-year no-take moratorium. There was decent support for that. The concern was, what are you going to do after that 5 years? If you just go to a two fish bag limit or nothing, you know, they would be wiped out very quickly. So we figured, you know, and a lot of fishermen suggested, why don't we just go stricter, 1 fish bag limit, and see how it works. See if the stocks come back. If they continue down, then we can evaluate other options there. The Moana Kea is not even currently regulated, so this would be a bag limit on these fish would be new. But again, they tend to be grouped together, so it makes sense. And no bag limit proposed for the Veki Nono. Concerns here: declining commercial catches when you average it or correct for effort. They group the kumu and the munu together in the commercial data. That's why it's graphed together. And then the Moana Kale, Moana Kea, however you call it, Moi Lua, Veki Nono, whatever name you give the other one, they were grouped together as well. And you can see going down, yet high market value continues to drive the demand, decreased stocks, and some recent evidence from some recent work is that the reproductive output of kumu are actually fairly small. So it tends to lead that fish to overfishing a little more than others. So that's goatfish.